There are two big Apple rumors in the water right now. The first one is a rumor about Apple's new AR smart glasses, and the second is about an iPhone foldable. So let's talk about each one in turn. The first is the smart glasses. It's apparently rumored to be called Project N50 internally, with a target launch date of 2027. It's intended to be this lightweight, everyday wearable akin to the Meta's Ray-Ban glasses, which I'm wearing right now if you're watching the video. The idea is that it's going to have integration of Apple Intelligence and Siri, God help us. It's going to have, cameras, microphones, speakers, and it's a practical AI wearable that's a stepping stone towards a full AI and AR powered glasses in the future. So think of it as your very first iPhone version of these things, really rudimentary, just like the Meta Ray-Ban glasses. But it is, a product category that they want to put onto a trajectory of full AR. I've talked about my belief that between earpods and smart glasses, these are the future of computing. It's sort of this ambient AI conversational computing. I think you'll only be pulling out your iPhone or some kind of slate piece of glass for high bandwidth interactions. But most of the time, you'll just have this ambient interaction with your wearable computers. And I think, earpods and glasses are going to be the form factor du jour, the form factor of choice for most people. So I'm frankly a little surprised that this didn't happen sooner for Apple. I think they've been distracted by stupid stuff like the Vision Pro, which is the overpriced AR VR glasses, and the car, which I think was a completely insane random side journey. This is the thing they should have been working on from the beginning. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, look, you mentioned the Apple Vision Pro, and that's what's on my mind. I don't think they were distracted by it as such. I think they made a strategic error and they're now correcting it, right? I think they made a bet that you basically start with a relatively bulky, very expensive device that can basically do the things that you believe that an AR headset should be able to do. But you've made various compromises, like I said, on form factor, on price, and things like that. And now, and while they've been doing that, that clearly hasn't been a huge success. But while that's been happening, Meta have been quietly kicking ass with these Meta glasses, which you are rocking right now, looking very fine. And, that's sort of the thing, right? Where you're like, oh, okay, instead of sort of going top down, where you start with the experience you want and wait for the hardware to catch up, you start with the form factor that makes sense. And then as that improves, you can add more capability. That's clearly the right strategic thing to do. Hindsight is always 2020. And you can say, well, that's sort of obvious, right? Like, just it wasn't ready. The technology wasn't ready. They tried to make it happen anyway, and it was the wrong thing to do. But, whether or not that was like a foreseeable error, it was clearly an error. And now they're like, okay, we're seeing the reality and we're pivoting, which is the right thing to do, right? So it's like, okay, is Apple well positioned to compete with Meta on the glasses? I would say yes, with the exception, as we've discussed previously, Chris, that Siri and Apple Intelligence seem to be really, really lagging, and Apple seem to be having difficulty getting their ducks in a row there. But they might eventually. In the meantime, there's a whole bunch of useful things that just the camera, the things like that, some basic augmented reality that can tie into the Apple ecosystem. I think that's the key part of it here, right? Meta doesn't have sure, it has Instagram, but it doesn't have like a private photo app or things like that. Apple has iPhoto. I think it's just a really good place to kind of do things. And I also imagine, maybe I'll be wrong here as well, but Apple have always been very good at design, right? So Meta had to basically ride on Ray-Ban's coattails. No one would buy like Meta designed glasses. Apple designed glasses could be a totally different thing. And, if they're able to get some of their mojo back, what we will have is a really beautifully designed, distinctively Apple, but also very beautiful pair of glasses that people like to wear as an accessory and get a bunch of useful stuff out of it too. And in that sense, it's going more in the direction of the Apple Watch, which makes all the sense in the world to me.
Yeah, you call it a kind of hindsight is 2020 type thing. Meta has had the Ray-Bans, and there has been Snapchat spectacles and stuff for quite some time. And the strategy that Meta's been employing of both a top-down, as you said, you described it really eloquently. I love that. It's, compromise on the form factor, go, build an incredible wearable computer and work down, and the other was compromise on the functionality and the computing and go from lightweight up. And Meta's been playing that strategy out for many, many, many years. And I think more than a hindsight is 2020. I think Tim Cook and the team were really a little bit arrogant and blind to the fact that actually the future of AR is doing both, and doing both in a concerted way. The strategy was right there in front of them. You talk about fashion and form factor. Yeah, I think Apple now needs to go to the number two, number three players. I'm not an expert in glasses. There's, ChatGPT tells me there's Safilo Group. They own Carrera, Smith, and Polaroid Eyewear. Jins, which is a Japanese brand. Warby Parker. There's a few other companies they can partner with, which I'm sure would be chomping at the bit to have an Apple partnership. But I think they are going to need to partner with an eyeglass company. This is more than Apple Watch. This is a fashion statement, and you need a wide and varied set of designs. And I don't know that Apple's going to go build all of the styles. Now, they may decide, just like Apple Watch, we don't need all the styles. We just need the Apple style, and it's a statement, and it's a part of the cult. But yes, I would say a little late, but better late than never. I think this is going to be a huge category for them and for everybody, and it's good to see them doing it. Similarly, along this vein, there's another form factor that they're starting to investigate closely and building towards, which is the Apple iPhone Fold, which, all the Android fanboys out there are going to say, oh my God, Android's had Fold for years and Apple, as usual, is late. But as can be said about the glasses, Apple's not interested in being first. They're interested in being best. The difference here, I think, from the glasses, I think they weren't paying attention to the glasses. I think they feel like they missed that boat internally. Here, I think they were intentionally ignoring it. I think the Fold form factor has been janky. The hinges, the crease in the screen, it's unclear what the value prop is. It's a crappy tablet, it's a crappy phone. I think it was right for them to just take a pass on that for a few years. It was very Apple of them to go that the technology for that's not ready. But now they feel like it is possibly ready, and they're targeting something in the second half of 2026 is the rumor. They're targeting, again, this is all just rumor, a 7.8 inch main foldable display with a 5.5 inch cover display. It's a book foldable, so it's it's not a razor type thing. It's a book. They're apparently aiming for the most discreet crease in the industry, and I think that is precisely what they need to do. The crease is really the problem with the form factor, and also the thickness. And actually, just one last point on this, I think the iPhone Air, the rumored iPhone Air, which is coming out in this generation, which is like razor thin, I think that's a technology demo for the iPhone Fold, because you need both sides to be razor thin for the folded version to not be a giant brick. And so I think they're going to learn a lot from that razor thin Air that's rumored to come out this year.
Yes, I definitely agree with your last point. I struggle with this whole foldable phone thing. And yeah, I guess never rule Apple and their design shops out, but it seems like one of those things that is a solution in search of a problem. And, folks like Samsung and others have been trying for years to find a form factor that actually makes sense for most people, and coming up short. And I think there are a few reasons for that. You mentioned the crease. There's the thickness and the added weight. These are all problems that I guess are somewhat solvable, although a foldable phone will always be heavier than an unfoldable phone that's using the same technology. One of the big things, though, I guess there are two things that I've seen with other people using these things and also playing with them myself that I think are somewhat less solvable, right? One is that the way that we use our phones is such a deeply engaged thing that an extra action to like unfold it, that's not something you want to do. You just want to have this device that's sort of always unfolded, right? And that's called a normal phone. So that's one. And then the other is actually aspect ratio, which might seem a bit nerdy, but I think it's a big one, right? Like we have this sort of narrow and tall aspect ratio, and all our apps have been designed for that. It's been designed for our hands and things like that. And so then when you have a foldable, you suddenly get something that is much closer to being a square. I think in the case of the Pixel Fold, it's actually a square. And you think to yourself, do I want a square screen? How often is that something that is useful to me? And the answer is not that often. Like, it's not even that great. You say, oh, great, bigger screen for watching movies. Well, good luck. You're going to have giant letterboxing on it. So, yeah, I don't know, man. I don't get it. I don't see a foldable in my future anytime soon. And I think the technology is just so incredibly cool. I'm blown away that you can make an LCD screen that has a crease in it. But in terms of actual utility, I think they're barking up the wrong tree. And like I said, one doesn't tend to write off Apple. But I doubt this is going to be a very successful mainstream version of the iPhone.
Yeah, you're right. This form factor hasn't mainstreamed, and I agree with you on the two reasons that you're pointing to. And actually, you stole that second reason was one I really want to spend a lot of time on because, yeah, when you open it up, it's square, and the video is not any bigger. The video is like marginally bigger than just holding your iPhone sideways.
You've got millions of pixels displaying black. Congratulations. We'll live in the
Yes,
future.
it's not as practical as you would imagine. And so what I think will happen, you have to look at Westworld. The Westworld tablet that's like looks like a phone and it unfolds and it's like impossibly thin when it unfolds. And actually, it's a trifold, and it turns into a really amazing device and it turns into a proper iPad style tablet. And so I think it's one of two things has to happen. It has to evolve into being a trifold, and and there is actually a device that came out that was trifold, and or the closed form factor needs to be quite tall, unnaturally tall for what we're used to, so that when you unfold it, actually it becomes a rectangle, not a square. And I actually think we can get away with phones that are just a little taller than we're used to, and maybe a little slimmer but taller. I think that will. I think people don't immediately think of that as being normal or comfortable, but I think there's room to change the form factor of the what they used to call it, the candy bar layout. And then once you unfold it, it is much more of a rectangle. I think that's something there. Or eventually they get so good at this that it's a trifold, and that's the Westworld device, and I think that's going to be the ultimate nirvana.
Yeah, look, I don't see it. Like, maybe I'm lacking imagination, but I actually think the current phone form factor is somewhat ideal. It doesn't need to be improved, right? Because if you have a foldable phone, you have two options, right? You can either take the current screen size and make the folded profile of the device much, much smaller, or you can take the current size of the phone and make the unfolded screen much, much bigger, which is actually really a tablet. And my question is, do you actually need either of those things, right? Like, people have accommodated to having phones in their pockets. Thinness is more important than sort of size. People put them in their handbags. The whole world's been designed around having a phone like that. I don't think that making something that's like a tiny candy bar shape is as revolutionary and valuable as people think. And then on the other hand, tablets are great, but they're more of a niche product, right? I don't need to have a tablet with me all the time. And if I'm just, one-handed browsing, doom scrolling, writing text, I don't want a device that big in my hand. So I feel, again, it's a solution in search of a problem. What is the problem with an unfoldable phone? I don't think there is one.
Yeah, I agree with you. I generally agree with you. It's niche. It's for pro users. It's certain kind of use cases. I'm just a nerd, and I often look back at my iPad longingly, wishing I could bring it more places. And I look at the iPad mini, wishing like, oh, geez, I really want to buy that. And I really want to find a use case for that. And realizing I'm never going to use it. I'm never going to keep it charged. I've got nowhere to put it. And I just wish that in some cases, some of the time, I could unfold my iPhone and have it be an iPad mini or a slightly larger. It's sort of just a nerdy dream of mine. But I agree with you. It's not a mainstream device, and not anytime soon.
I mean, look, maybe just to sort of finish this, it's like, if there were no compromises, if I could have a phone that is the same form factor as it is now, with a screen that is the same as it is now, and then once in a while I could unfold it and there was a bigger screen in the middle and it didn't cost me much more money and it didn't add much more weight, then that would be awesome, right? And look, screen technology keeps getting better and better and also cheaper and cheaper. I was blown away. This is sort of a funny story. It might seem off topic, but I've got a friend who vapes, right? Nothing wrong with that. And, he has, most vapes are disposable these days. He had a disposable vape on it. And this disposable vape had a backlit color LCD screen on it. And I'm like, why has this thing got a screen? He's like, oh, it shows you how much charge is left. And also it advertises the other flavors of vapes. And I'm like, and this thing's disposable. He's like, yeah. And it costs the same as all the others, right? So the cost of screens keeps getting cheaper and cheaper. And now an okay resolution color backlit screen is so close to free that you can just stick it on a disposable device. That actually blew my mind. And I'm like, of course, that trickles up, over time, really good LCD screens will become very cheap. So sure, like if everything's a screen because why not, then why not? But I think we're at least 5, 10 years away from that in terms of the type of, high resolution touch screens that we expect from our phones.
Yeah, I mean, you got to get started somewhere, but I think the intention is the goal has to be that it's essentially free. It's so thin, so light, so creaseless, so lacking in any real compromises that's where it has to go. But they got to start. They got to start working on it. Otherwise, they're going to be way, way behind. You mentioned how cheap the screens are. Well, not if the Trump tariffs and the complete catastrophe of the world economy continues to unfold. So we'll see.
You couldn't help yourself, could you? You couldn't help
Yeah,
yourself.
exactly.